The Lost Signal. Captain Daniel Riker leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the endless stars stretching before him on the bridge of the Voyager. Space had always held a sense of peace for him, yet he was aware of its lurking dangers. As commander of one of humanity's most advanced exploration ships, he had faced countless unknowns, but today's mission had an eerie feeling about it. His crew had been navigating through a sparsely charted area known as Sector Gamma 9, a sector infamous for strange disturbances and mysterious signals. Just as he was about to stand and grab a cup of synthetic coffee, a blip appeared on the screen. It was faint but unmistakable, a distress signal. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he focused on the readout. This wasn't any ordinary distress signal. It was alien, yet it contained just enough familiar coding for him to understand its urgency. "Commander," his first officer, Lydia Chen, announced, her voice tinged with concern, "we've locked onto a signal from a nearby vessel. It's in terrible shape, sir. The ship's life support systems are failing rapidly." Daniel's curiosity was piqued. A failing alien ship in an uncharted region of space. This was the kind of challenge that had drawn him to the depths of the galaxy in the first place. "Bring us closer, Lydia," he commanded. "Let's see if we can assist." As the Voyager glided toward the coordinates, the distress signal grew weaker, barely more than a whisper through the cosmic noise. Moments later, the alien vessel appeared on their monitors, a small, battle-scarred craft with scorch marks across its hull and debris floating nearby. It was clear that the ship had suffered a brutal encounter, possibly a skirmish with a hostile faction. Daniel felt a surge of responsibility. Whatever had happened here was serious, and there might still be survivors. "Initiate docking procedures, Lydia. I'm going aboard." Lydia nodded, the worry clear on her face. "Be careful, Captain. There's no telling what you'll find over there." Clad in his advanced exosuit, Daniel stepped onto the alien ship. The air was thick with smoke, illuminated by the dim glow of emergency lights flickering down the narrow corridors. His footsteps echoed against the metallic floors as he cautiously made his way deeper into the ship, searching for signs of life. The deeper he went, the more he felt an overwhelming sense of desolation. Panels sparked, wires dangled from the ceiling, and a subtle hum reverberated through the damaged infrastructure. Just as he was beginning to wonder if he had arrived too late, his eyes fell upon something astonishing: 4 stasis pods, lined up against the far wall of the main chamber. Each pod contained an unconscious alien female, each one strikingly different yet visibly in distress. Daniel's heart raced as he scanned the life support systems attached to the pods. The indicators were flashing red. These 4 individuals were on the brink of death. He knew he couldn't leave them behind. With practiced precision, he initiated a transfer sequence, carefully moving each pod back to the safety of the Voyager. After an intense few minutes, all 4 women were safely aboard his ship. As the medical bay's systems stabilized them, Daniel looked on, curiosity sparking in his mind. Who were they? And how had they come to be stranded in this desolate part of the galaxy? As the medical team worked, he reflected on the clues he had found on their ship. The design was unfamiliar, sleek yet scarred, as if built for both elegance and resilience. The 4 alien women seemed part of a species he hadn't encountered before. Several hours passed before the first of the alien women regained consciousness. Her skin was a pale lavender, her hair an intricate weave of shimmering silver, and her eyes, piercing emerald green, locked onto Daniel's with a mixture of fear and relief. She opened her mouth to speak, but her language was foreign, an array of melodious tones that defied translation. Thinking quickly, Daniel activated his portable translator, catching fragments of her words. "Help, ambush, dangerous enemy, Vorax." The word Vorax made his blood run cold. He had heard tales of the Vorax, a race known across several galaxies for their ruthless conquering tactics, leaving only destruction in their wake. If these women had barely escaped the clutches of the Vorax, then they were likely high-value targets. As the remaining 3 women awoke, they introduced themselves. Seraphine, a healer with an air of quiet wisdom. Nissa, an engineer with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mira, a skilled strategist with a fierce determination. And Elira, a warrior whose strength was evident in her stance, even as she recovered. Once they had exchanged introductions, the women explained the events that led to their perilous situation. They were part of a diplomatic mission from the planet Valera, a society that prided itself on peace and technological advancement. The Vorax, however, had attacked them without warning, tearing through their ship in a brutal assault. They had barely managed to activate the distress signal before their systems began to fail. Daniel listened intently, feeling a sense of duty swell within him. These women weren't just survivors, they were key players in their people's fight for survival. As he pondered their story, he knew that leaving them alone to fend for themselves was not an option. His decision was clear. He would help them get to safety, whatever it took. "Captain Riker," Seraphine said, her voice soft yet firm, "we cannot thank you enough for saving us. We know the risk you're taking by involving yourself, but if you choose to help us, we will be forever grateful." Daniel nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "You're not alone in this. We'll get you to safety. But you need to tell me everything about the Vorax and their capabilities. If we're going to evade them, we need a plan." For the next several hours, the crew of the Voyager and the Valerian women worked together, sharing information and devising strategies. Nissa collaborated with the Voyager's engineers, boosting the ship's shielding and defenses, while Mira coordinated with Lydia on route strategies that would help them avoid Vorax-controlled space. Elira trained with the security team, preparing them in case a battle was inevitable. Daniel couldn't help but notice the bond that was forming between them. The Valerians were resourceful, resilient, and had a profound respect for life, qualities he admired. He found himself drawn to their culture and their quiet resolve, sensing that, despite their struggles, they carried a profound strength. As the last of the preparations were made, Daniel checked their course one final time. He was about to give the command to launch when Seraphine approached him. Her eyes held an unspoken gratitude, but there was something else there, a connection he felt but couldn't yet explain. "Captain," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, not just for saving our lives, but for believing in us." Daniel nodded, feeling an unexpected warmth within him. "You're welcome, Seraphine. We're in this together now." With that, the Voyager set its course, bound for a distant outpost where the Valerian women could find safety. But as they hurtled through the vast, empty reaches of space, Daniel knew that the journey would be fraught with challenges. The Vorax were relentless, and they would not give up their prey so easily. Yet, for the first time in his career, he felt that this mission was more than just a duty. It was a fight for something greater, a chance to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of an adventure that would change all their lives forever. Shadows of the Vorax. The journey to the safe outpost was far from a quiet escape. Captain Daniel Riker could sense the unease rippling through his crew. The Vorax were known for their brutal, relentless tactics, and by aiding the Valerian women, he had placed everyone aboard the Voyager at risk. Yet, the resolve in Seraphine, Nissa, Mira, and Elira's eyes kept him steadfast. These four women had faced the horrors of the galaxy firsthand, and their presence filled the ship with a rare determination. As the Voyager continued through deep space, Nissa worked tirelessly alongside the engineering crew to reinforce the ship's defenses. In the heart of the engine room, she moved with calm efficiency, guiding the crew as they adjusted the shields and recalibrated the weapon systems. Despite the gravity of their mission, Nissa's cool demeanor reassured everyone, her quiet confidence speaking volumes. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself discussing strategy with Mira, who was quick to analyze their route and map potential Vorax ambush points. Her tactical mind impressed him. Her ability to think several steps ahead was something he hadn't often encountered, even among seasoned officers. Mira held herself with a fierce grace, and Daniel admired the way she calmly delivered instructions, her confidence tempered by an unwavering dedication to protecting her people. "You must understand, Captain," Mira explained one day as they reviewed their escape route. "The Voraks are not easily fooled. They anticipate fear and thrive on desperation. We have to be unpredictable, keep our movements as erratic as possible." Daniel nodded, his focus unwavering. "Understood. We'll follow a less direct route, even if it takes longer. Avoiding a fight is our priority." Mira nodded in agreement, though Daniel noticed a faint glimmer of sadness in her expression. "If only we had a choice," she murmured, almost to herself. As days passed, the Voyager's crew grew closer to the Valyrian women, each of them finding ways to contribute. Seraphine had established a small medical bay on board, using her expertise as a healer to tend to both the crew and her friends. She treated the smallest injuries with genuine compassion, and her gentle presence offered the crew a sense of calm they hadn't realized they needed. One evening, Daniel found himself observing Seraphine as she treated a minor burn on his hand, sustained while assisting Nyssa in the engine room. Her touch was gentle, and her expression serene, yet he noticed a wariness in her eyes, as though the weight of her people's survival rested solely on her shoulders. "Thank you," Daniel said, feeling a strange warmth from her touch. "It's rare to find such dedication and compassion." Seraphine gave a soft smile, her eyes momentarily meeting his. "We Valyrians believe that all lives are precious, Captain. It's what makes our conflict with the Voraks so difficult. They see life as expendable, a means to their conquest. But every soul matters to us." Daniel nodded, deeply moved by her words. As he returned to the bridge that evening, he felt a renewed sense of responsibility, not only to his crew but to the Valyrian people. These women weren't just survivors. They were symbols of a hope that, despite everything, goodness could prevail in the vast, uncaring reaches of space. Yet, the journey remained fraught with danger. One morning, the alarm blared across the ship, snapping everyone out of their routines. A Vorax scout ship had detected their presence. It loomed menacingly on the radar, closing in at an alarming speed. Daniel rushed to the bridge, his heart pounding. He turned to Lydia, who was analyzing the enemy's movements. "Can we outrun them?" he asked, hoping for a miracle. Lydia shook her head, her expression grim. "Not likely, sir. Their ship is faster, and they're armed to the teeth. We'll have to fight." A tense silence fell over the bridge. The Vorax scout was heavily armed, and despite Nyssa's upgrades, the Voyager was no match in a direct confrontation. Daniel's mind raced, considering every possible maneuver, every potential strategy that might buy them time. But then Elira, the warrior among the Valyrians, spoke up, her voice steady and unyielding. "Captain, let me assist. I may not know your ship's weapon systems, but I am well versed in combat tactics. Allow me to lead a defensive team. If they attempt a boarding, we'll be ready." Daniel looked at her, noting the intensity in her gaze. Elira radiated strength, her presence a powerful reminder that, though they were in desperate circumstances, they were far from defeated. "Very well, Elira," Daniel replied, nodding in agreement. "Take charge of the security team. Do whatever it takes to keep them at bay." Elira's eyes sparkled with determination as she gathered the security team, preparing them for the possible incursion. Daniel watched her, impressed by her fearless resolve, and he found himself wondering how many battles she had survived to become the warrior she was today. As the Vorax ship drew closer, the Voyager's crew braced themselves. Nyssa stayed in the engine room, constantly monitoring the shields, while Mira directed tactical responses from the bridge. Every member of the crew worked with singular purpose, united by the shared threat. The Vorax ship opened fire, sending shockwaves reverberating through the Voyager. Sparks flew, and the lights flickered as the shields absorbed the impact. Daniel gritted his teeth, shouting commands to hold their position as Elira's team took cover near the entry points, ready for any breach. Moments later, a small craft detached from the Vorax ship and hurtled toward them, its metal glinting ominously against the blackness of space. The boarding party. Daniel's heart pounded, and he glanced at Lydia. "Prepare for contact," he ordered. The crew waited, tense and silent, as the Vorax boarding party latched onto the Voyager. With a sickening screech of metal, the airlock door began to open, and Vorax soldiers poured in, hulking figures clad in dark armor, each one brandishing an array of lethal weapons. Elira moved like a force of nature, leading the defense team with unparalleled skill. Her movements were a blur, every strike calculated and precise. She wielded her blade with a grace that seemed almost poetic, countering each Vorax attack with unyielding strength. The crew rallied around her, inspired by her ferocity, and together they pushed back the Vorax forces, holding their ground against overwhelming odds. Daniel monitored the battle from the bridge, his admiration for Elira growing with each passing moment. Despite the chaos, the crew fought with a unified purpose, their determination reinforced by the presence of the Valerians. Finally, after a brutal struggle, the last of the Vorax soldiers fell. Elira stood at the forefront, breathing heavily, her expression fierce yet triumphant. The crew erupted in cheers, their victory a testament to their resilience and courage. As the Vorax ship retreated, Daniel allowed himself a moment of relief. They had survived, but the danger was far from over. The Vorax would not take this defeat lightly, and he knew they would be back, stronger and more determined than ever. In the aftermath, Daniel gathered Seraphine, Nyssa, Mira, and Elira in the briefing room. They sat around the table, their expressions wary but resolute. "We may have won this battle," Daniel began, "but the Vorax won't stop. They've marked us as a threat now, and they'll keep coming. I need to know if there's any way to gain an advantage, any weakness we can exploit." Nyssa exchanged a glance with Mira, who nodded subtly before speaking. "The Vorax are relentless, but they're not invulnerable. If we can gather intelligence on their fleet movements, we might be able to avoid future encounters or even strike first if necessary." Daniel considered her words, feeling a sense of hope flicker within him. "Then that's our next move. We'll monitor their communications, stay one step ahead. Together, we can outwit them." As the crew dispersed, Daniel watched the Valerian women, each one embodying the strength and resilience of their people. In that moment, he understood that their journey together was far from over. They had not only joined forces in the face of adversity, but had become allies, bound by a shared purpose. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, Captain Daniel Riker knew that this mission would push them to the very limits of their courage, testing the bonds they had forged. But with allies like Seraphine, Nyssa, Mira, and Elira by his side, he believed they could face any challenge the galaxy threw at them. Secrets of the Valerian Past. The Voyager continued its journey through the vast stretches of space, each day bringing Captain Daniel Riker and his crew closer to the uncertain future they shared with their Valerian allies. After their narrow victory over the Vorax boarding party, tensions on the ship had calmed slightly, yet an underlying unease lingered in the air. The Vorax were relentless hunters, and everyone on board knew that their respite would be short-lived. Over the next few days, the Valerian women integrated more deeply into the crew's daily routines. Seraphine's presence in the medical bay became a reassuring constant, her knowledge of both medicine and natural healing techniques vastly improving the health and morale of the crew. Nyssa continued to work closely with the engineers, upgrading the Voyager's systems with advanced Valerian technology, pushing the ship to the limits of human engineering. Yet, despite the practical improvements, Daniel sensed that there was something hidden beneath the surface, a secret the Valerians were holding back. Each of them carried a weight that he could not fully understand, an unspoken truth that shadowed their every action. The question gnawed at him, and he knew that if they were to survive, they couldn't afford any secrets. Late one evening, Daniel sought out Seraphine in the medical bay. She was alone, carefully organizing vials of healing tonics she had crafted from alien plants the crew had collected over the years. Her movements were precise, almost meditative, and Daniel took a moment to observe the quiet strength she exuded before he spoke. "Seraphine," he began, his tone gentle but firm, "there's something I need to ask you. We've been through a lot together, and I trust you. But I can't help feeling that there's something you're not telling us, something about why the Vorax attacked you in the first place." Seraphine stilled, her gaze fixed on the vials in her hands. After a moment of silence, she turned to face him, her green eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "You're right, Captain," she admitted softly. "There is something we haven't told you. It's not that we didn't want to, but some truths are painful to relive, even in the telling." Daniel's curiosity deepened, and he waited patiently, knowing that trust was a fragile thing, especially with the weight of survival resting on both their shoulders. "We Valerians have a history that few outside our people know," Seraphine continued, her voice laced with a quiet reverence. "Long ago, we were not the peaceful society you see today. Our ancestors were warriors, fierce and relentless, much like the Vorax. For generations, we conquered worlds, spreading our empire across the stars. But over time, our leaders saw the suffering and destruction we were causing, and they made a vow to change, to seek peace instead of conquest." She paused, her gaze drifting into the distance as if she was seeing the ghosts of her people's past. "We dedicated ourselves to knowledge, healing, and diplomacy. We dismantled our armies, destroyed our weapons, and focused our energies on building alliances and protecting the vulnerable. But not everyone agreed with this new path. There were factions within our people who believed that we had grown weak, that abandoning our warrior roots was a mistake." Daniel listened intently, sensing that this revelation was only the beginning. "One of those factions broke away," Seraphine said, her voice lowering. "They became mercenaries, joining forces with the Vorax to reclaim the power they believed we had abandoned. It was these Valerian defectors who shared our secrets with the Vorax, showing them how to hunt us, how to exploit our weaknesses." A chill ran down Daniel's spine as he processed her words. The Vorax, armed with Valerian knowledge, were more dangerous than he had realized. He began to understand why the Valerians had been targeted so ruthlessly. "So, this is personal for them," Daniel murmured. "The Vorax see you as a threat, not just because of who you are, but because of who you once were." Seraphine nodded, her expression haunted. "Yes, we are the last of our people who believe in the path of peace. If the Vorax succeed in destroying us, our legacy will be lost. They'll have silenced the last voice for harmony among our kind." Moved by the weight of her words, Daniel felt a surge of determination. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile. "We won't let that happen. As long as I'm captain of the Voyager, I promise that I'll protect you and your people's legacy." A faint smile touched Seraphine's lips, and for the first time since she had come aboard, Daniel saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The following day, Daniel called a meeting in the briefing room. The atmosphere was tense as the Valerian women and senior officers of the Voyager gathered around the table, each aware that this meeting would shape the course of their journey. "Thanks to Seraphine, we now know the full extent of our enemy," Daniel began. "The Vorax are not just hunting them, they're trying to erase a legacy. They're targeting the last remnants of a people who once wielded the power to conquer galaxies. Now, we're up against a force armed with knowledge of both Valerian and Vorax technology." Mira leaned forward, her sharp gaze meeting Daniel's. "If we're going to survive, we need to use that knowledge against them. There has to be something in Valerian history, something you know about the Vorax that could give us an advantage." Nissa nodded, her mind already whirring with ideas. "Our engineering technology is advanced, but it's meant for defense, not offense. If we could modify the Voyager's systems with some of the techniques our ancestors used, we might be able to defend ourselves more effectively." Elira, the warrior, remained silent, her gaze distant yet fierce. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low, determined murmur. In ancient times, our people used powerful energy shields that could deflect even the most advanced weaponry. It's dangerous, but if we could replicate that technology on this ship, we might have a chance. Daniel considered her suggestion, knowing that it would be a difficult and risky endeavor. How much time would you need? Nissa exchanged a glance with Elira. Days, at least. The technology is complex, and we'll need to retrofit it to work with the Voyager's systems. But if we can pull it off, we'll be ready for the Vorax. Determined to do whatever it took, the crew set to work. Over the next few days, the Voyager's engine room became a hub of activity as Valerian and human engineers worked side by side, sharing knowledge and combining their strengths. Nissa was at the forefront, guiding the engineers with a calm authority, her knowledge of Valerian technology crucial to the project's success. During this time, Daniel found himself spending more and more time with Seraphine. Their conversations moved beyond tactical discussions, delving into the philosophies and values that had shaped their respective cultures. Daniel learned about Valerian art, their unique meditation practices, and the songs they sang to honor the memories of their fallen. In return, he shared stories of Earth, of humanity's own struggles and triumphs. One evening, as they stood together on the observation deck, Seraphine looked out at the stars, her expression thoughtful. "You humans are resilient," she said softly. "Despite all the challenges you've faced, you keep pushing forward, always reaching for the stars." Daniel smiled, a warm pride filling his chest. "That's true. Humanity has its flaws, but we never give up. And neither will I, not until we see this mission through." The preparations were nearly complete when the Vorax finally appeared on the scanners, a massive battle cruiser, unmistakable and terrifying in its sheer size and firepower. The crew tensed as they watched the enemy vessel closing in, each of them knowing that the stakes had never been higher. But this time, they were ready. With the new Valerian defenses integrated into the Voyager, they had a fighting chance. Nissa and Elira took command of the defensive systems, while Mira directed the crew from the bridge, her sharp mind tracking every move the Vorax made. As the Vorax cruiser fired its first volley, the Voyager's new shields flared to life, absorbing the energy and deflecting it harmlessly into space. The crew cheered, their spirits lifted by the sight of their defenses holding strong. The Vorax ship fired again, but once more, the shields absorbed the impact, and Daniel felt a surge of hope. "Return fire," he commanded, his voice steady. "Let's show them we're not backing down." The Voyager's weapons flared to life, striking back with a precision that sent a clear message. They were not helpless prey. The Vorax cruiser hesitated, then slowly backed away, its weapons falling silent as it disappeared into the vast darkness of space. As the crew celebrated their victory, Daniel looked around at his Valerian allies. They had survived another battle, but he knew that their journey was far from over. The Vorax would come again, stronger and more determined, and they would have to be ready. Yet, in that moment, he felt a profound sense of unity, a bond forged in battle, strengthened by trust. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, united by a shared purpose and a newfound hope that, even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, peace could still find a way to prevail. Whispers of betrayal. The Voyager drifted quietly through the vast reaches of space, the stars twinkling like distant memories against the dark canvas of the universe. Captain Daniel Riker and his crew had managed to evade the Vorax once again, their newly fortified defenses proving more resilient than even they had dared to hope. But as the tension from their last encounter subsided, an uneasy calm settled over the ship. Daniel could feel it, a shadow of doubt creeping into his mind, the nagging feeling that the Vorax had retreated too easily. Days passed, and the Voyager's crew remained on high alert, each of them acutely aware that their journey was becoming increasingly perilous. Seraphine, Nissa, Mira, and Elira had grown closer to the crew, their presence woven into the very fabric of the ship's daily life. Yet, there was a lingering tension in the air, a sense of unfinished business that no one dared to address. One evening, as the crew gathered for a much-needed moment of respite in the mess hall, Daniel observed his crew interacting with their Valyrian allies. Mira, ever the strategist, was deep in conversation with Lydia, the first officer, likely exchanging insights on tactical maneuvers. Elira, the warrior, was sparring with a young security officer, her movements swift and precise, showing him how to react faster in combat. Seraphine offered gentle guidance to a crew member nursing a burn on his hand, while Nissa animatedly discussed potential upgrades to the ship's navigation systems with the engineering team. Daniel couldn't deny the strength of the bonds forming between his crew and the Valyrians, and yet, as he watched, an inexplicable sense of caution gnawed at him, as if he were on the edge of a revelation he couldn't quite grasp. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Vorax's retreat had been orchestrated, that they had allowed the Voyager to escape. Determined to investigate, Daniel made his way to the bridge and initiated a private scan of the surrounding space, checking for any lingering signs of Vorax ships. After an hour of meticulous searching, the results came back negative. No ships detected within a reasonable range. He sighed, almost willing himself to relax, but his instincts refused to be silenced. The following morning, Daniel called a private meeting with the Valyrian women in the briefing room, hoping to discuss his concerns without alarming the crew. As they gathered around the table, he noticed an unusual tension between Mira and Elira, an unspoken friction that had emerged over the past few days. Seraphine and Nissa exchanged worried glances, as if sensing it too, but neither woman spoke. "Thank you for coming," Daniel began, his tone measured but serious. "I wanted to discuss our recent encounter with the Vorax. It seemed too easy. We've faced their forces before, and they're not known to back down without a fight." Mira folded her arms, her expression guarded. "It is unusual, Captain. The Vorax are relentless. If they retreated, it's because they have something planned. We must assume they're watching us." Elira, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Or perhaps there's another reason they left," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. Daniel frowned, sensing a deeper meaning in her words. "What do you mean, Elira?" Elira hesitated, her gaze flicking to Mira with a look of mistrust. "I have my doubts, Captain. Among our people, there are those who believe that some of us are willing to do anything to survive, even if it means making compromises with the enemy." Mira's eyes flashed with anger, her usually composed demeanor cracking. "Are you implying that someone here would betray us to the Vorax?" Elira's gaze didn't waver. "I'm saying that we have to be cautious, Mira. We cannot afford to blindly trust, even within our own ranks." The room fell into a tense silence as the implication of Elira's words settled over them. Daniel observed the exchange carefully, noting the tension between the two women. It was clear that there was more history here than he had been told, a rift that went beyond simple mistrust. Breaking the silence, Seraphine stepped forward, her calm voice attempting to diffuse the tension. "Please, both of you. This division among us is exactly what the Vorax would want. If we're to survive, we must stand united." Daniel nodded in agreement, though his mind was racing with questions. Elira's suspicion was troubling, but her wariness wasn't entirely unfounded. In a situation as desperate as theirs, even the strongest alliances could be tested. "Seraphine is right," he said firmly. "If we let suspicion tear us apart, we'll be doing the Vorax's work for them. We need to stay focused on our mission." But he paused, his gaze meeting each of the Valyrian women's in turn. "If there's anything else you think I need to know, any history, any hidden alliances, now is the time to tell me." A tense silence followed as each of the women hesitated, clearly struggling with the weight of what they carried. Finally, Mira spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. "There is something, Captain. In our last encounter with the Vorax, before we met you, we were approached by a faction of their forces, an intermediary who claimed to be interested in peace. They promised us safe passage if we provided them with information on Valyrian technology. I refused, of course, but..." She trailed off, her gaze shifting uneasily toward Elira. Elira's eyes narrowed. "You may have refused, Mira, but that doesn't mean others did." The implication was clear. A Valerian might have leaked their secrets, even unintentionally, to the Vorax. It explained the Vorax's uncanny ability to track and ambush them with such precision. Daniel felt the gravity of the situation deepening, and he knew that the crew needed answers, and quickly. "Whatever happened, we can't change the past," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "But we can control what happens next. I need each of you to be vigilant. If there are any signs that someone on this ship is feeding information to the Vorax, we'll deal with it. Until then, we proceed as a team." The Valyrian women nodded, each of them wearing a somber expression. It was clear that trust had been fractured, but Daniel could see that they were committed to the mission, despite their differences. Over the following days, the tension on the ship grew palpable. Elira and Mira rarely spoke, each of them keeping a close watch on the other, and Daniel noticed Seraphine and Nissa becoming increasingly withdrawn. He felt the weight of command pressing on him more than ever, the responsibility of keeping his crew united, even as the seeds of doubt threatened to divide them. Then late one night, as Daniel reviewed the ship's logs alone on the bridge, a faint encrypted signal appeared on the monitor. His heart pounded as he studied it, recognizing it as a transmission, a message being sent out from the Voyager. Quickly, he traced the source of the signal, his fingers flying across the console as he decrypted the message. What he found chilled him to the core. The transmission was directed toward a Vorax frequency, its contents encoded in a complex Valyrian cipher. Without hesitation, Daniel alerted Lydia and ordered a security lockdown. He gathered Mira, Elira, Seraphine, and Nissa in the briefing room, his expression dark as he confronted them with the evidence. "Someone aboard this ship has been sending messages to the Vorax," he said, his voice filled with a restrained fury. "This transmission was made just moments ago, using a Valerian code. I want an explanation, and I want it now." Elira's expression hardened, her gaze flicking to Mira with a fierce intensity. "I knew it," she hissed. "I told you there was a traitor among us." Mira shot back, her voice defiant. "I've done nothing to betray my people, Elira, and you know it." Seraphine stepped between them, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Enough. This division is tearing us apart. We need to find the truth, but accusing each other without evidence will only weaken us further." Daniel took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "I'm not accusing anyone, yet, but we need to find out who sent that message. I'll review the ship's logs and security footage. Until then, I'm confining all of you to quarters." The Valerians reluctantly agreed, though each of them wore expressions of anger and frustration. As they left the room, Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settle over him more heavily than ever. He knew that the days ahead would be filled with suspicion and doubt, and he could only hope that the truth, when revealed, wouldn't shatter the fragile alliance they had built. Hours later, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, reviewing the logs again, searching for any clue that might explain the transmission. His mind raced with questions, each one more troubling than the last. Who among them had betrayed the others? And what could drive someone to risk everything for an alliance with the enemy? As he studied the encrypted message, a chilling realization dawned on him. The Vorax knew more about the Voyager's defenses than he had anticipated, and if they had a spy on board, then no one, not even his closest allies, could be trusted. The stars outside his window were silent witnesses, indifferent to the turmoil within the ship. And as the Voyager drifted into the unknown, Captain Daniel Riker knew that this mission had become something far darker and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Confronting the spy. Captain Daniel Riker stood alone on the bridge, the silent hum of the ship's systems his only company as he replayed the encrypted transmission again. Each time he listened, his mind cycled through the same questions, the same anxieties gnawing at him. Who had betrayed them? Why had the Vorax allowed them to escape in the last encounter? The message had confirmed what he feared most. Someone on board was providing intel to the Vorax, jeopardizing not only the Valerians, but every soul aboard the Voyager. As dawn broke across the artificial timekeeping system on the ship, Daniel called a meeting with his senior officers and the 4 Valerian women in the briefing room. This time, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken accusations. Elara's sharp gaze remained fixed on Mira, who refused to meet her eyes, a bitter look of defiance on her face. Nyssa and Seraphine sat close together, their expressions guarded, while Lydia and the other officers exchanged worried glances. "Thank you all for coming," Daniel began, his tone firm and resolute. "Last night, we intercepted an encrypted transmission from this ship to the Vorax. Someone here has been feeding them information, putting us all at risk. This is no longer just a matter of trust, it's a matter of survival." A murmur rippled through the room, and Daniel raised a hand to silence them. "I've reviewed the logs and isolated the location of the transmission's origin," he continued, his gaze scanning the room. The signal came from the engineering bay. The announcement sent a shockwave through the group. Nyssa's eyes widened, and she leaned forward, her voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "The engineering bay? That's impossible. I would have noticed if someone was tampering with our systems." Daniel held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Unless someone was careful enough to cover their tracks," he replied. Elara crossed her arms, her voice laced with suspicion. "It's not surprising. Mira has had access to nearly every system on this ship, especially as she's been working closely with Lydia on tactical strategies." Mira's eyes blazed as she snapped back. "If I were working with the Vorax, do you think I'd risk my own life by staying aboard this ship? You know me, Elira. I would never betray my people." Elira scoffed. "You've always been ambitious, Mira. Maybe you think an alliance with the Vorax will grant you more power than our so-called peaceful diplomacy." Mira's fists clenched, but Seraphine placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "This infighting is exactly what the Vorax want," Seraphine said, her voice soft but firm. "We need to keep calm and search for the truth together." Daniel intervened, raising his voice to command their attention. "That's enough," he said, casting a steely glance between Elora and Mira. "This situation is tense, and we're all under stress, but accusations won't solve anything. Instead, we're going to do this by the book. Security teams will monitor all communications and restrict access to sensitive systems until further notice. No one, Valerian or human, will have unsupervised access." Lydia nodded, her face resolute. "Understood, Captain. We'll secure the ship and begin a thorough investigation." Over the following days, the atmosphere aboard the Voyager grew even more strained. Each of the Valerian women kept to their assigned tasks. The suspicion hung between them like a shroud. The crew, sensing the tension, grew wary, and whispers of betrayal began to circulate. For the first time since the Valerians had joined them, the alliance felt fragile, held together by thin threads of necessity rather than genuine trust. Daniel spent most of his time overseeing the investigation, but the results were frustratingly inconclusive. Whoever had sent the transmission was skilled enough to erase their tracks, leaving no direct evidence to implicate anyone. He was beginning to wonder if he'd ever find the truth when an unexpected visitor appeared outside his quarters one evening. Seraphine. "Captain," she greeted him, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a sadness in her eyes, a weight that seemed to have grown heavier over the past few days. "May I speak with you?" Daniel nodded, gesturing for her to enter. He closed the door behind them, motioning for her to sit. "What's on your mind, Seraphine?" Seraphine hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I can no longer stay silent, Captain. I know it may put me at risk, but you need to understand the history between Mira and Elira. It might provide you with the insight you need." Daniel listened intently as Seraphine explained the rivalry that had festered between Mira and Elira since their early days in Valerian society. Elira had once been part of a Valerian faction known for its traditional warrior values, while Mira had advocated for progressive diplomacy, seeking alliances rather than conflict. The two ideologies had clashed, creating a bitter rift between them, a rift that had only grown with time. Elira believes Mira's diplomatic leanings make her vulnerable to betrayal, while Mira sees Elira's militant background as dangerous, too aligned with the Vorax way, Seraphine said, her voice heavy with regret. They both have valid concerns, but this rivalry is clouding their judgment, and now it's threatening our mission. Daniel sighed, absorbing the new information. Thank you for telling me, Seraphine, but if we're to root out the spy, we need more than context. We need evidence. Seraphine nodded, a flicker of resolve in her eyes. Then I'll help you find it. For the sake of our people and yours, we cannot let this betrayal go unanswered. The next day, Daniel implemented a plan to test the loyalty of each Valerian without alerting them to his suspicions. Using subtle misinformation, he carefully leaked false tactical plans to Mira and Elira individually, setting a trap to see if any of the fabricated data would reach the Vorax. As the days passed with no sign of a breach, Daniel began to wonder if he had misjudged his suspicions. But on the fifth day, his gamble paid off. A second transmission was intercepted, and this time it carried details of the false plans he had fed to Elira. The discovery hit him hard. Elira, the fierce warrior who had fought alongside his crew, had been the one feeding information to their enemies. Shocked and deeply disappointed, he called an emergency meeting, bringing Elira into the briefing room under the pretense of discussing a tactical maneuver. When everyone had gathered, Daniel stood at the head of the table, his expression cold and unyielding. Elira, he said, his voice filled with barely restrained anger, do you have anything to say for yourself? Elira looked around, confused, her gaze shifting from Daniel to her fellow Valerians. Captain, what are you talking about? Daniel held up a data pad, displaying the intercepted transmission. We intercepted another message to the Vorax, containing false information I shared with you alone. There's no denying it now. You're the spy. The room fell into a stunned silence as everyone turned to Elira, her face pale with shock. That's impossible, Elira cried, her voice trembling. I would never betray you. Someone must have framed me. Mira crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. You always claim to be loyal, Elira, but your actions speak otherwise. Elira looked to Seraphine and Nissa, desperation in her eyes. Please, you know me. I fought for you, for all of you. This has to be a setup. Daniel's jaw tightened. If that's true, you'll have a chance to prove it. But for now, you're confined to quarters under guard. We can't take any chances. Two security officers escorted Elira from the room, her protests fading as the door slid shut. The remaining Valerians looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of relief and sadness. Daniel felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders, but he knew it was necessary to protect the ship. As the days passed, Elira's confinement allowed the tension on board to ease, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He reviewed the evidence repeatedly, searching for any indication that he might have made a mistake. Then late one night, he uncovered a discrepancy, a security log entry showing that Mira had accessed the engineering bay just moments before the first transmission was sent. Realization dawned on him like a thunderclap. Mira had staged the entire situation, setting Elira up as the scapegoat while she continued feeding information to the Vorax. Furious with himself for not seeing it sooner, Daniel called an immediate security team to detain Mira. As Mira was brought to the bridge, her defiant expression softened into,